Hi, Sandy. Hello, Sandy. How are you doing?
Good. How are you doing?
Oh, just super unbelievable. I just,
Super.
yeah, I'm just got through, one of Patrick's sessions too. Oh, here's Miles.
And what happened?
There was one point where he said that, hi, Miles. It was one point where Patrick said he was going to like he would embrace us all. And at that point, Stuart started to just express some kind of combination of joy or agony or whatever. I don't know what it was. But anyway, we'll have it later. Hey, Adam, how you doing? Good. We're just getting started here. Anyway, well, we'll see how many people are joining up, but what I thought we'd talk about initially, oh, Stuart's here. There we go. And let's see, Tim is here and Kevin's here. Hey, Stuart, Tim. Hey, Tim. Tim gets to sit by the open window looking at the mountains. We have to sit in the cornfields. Well, anyway, hi, Stuart and Kevin. And Kevin's, I think it's like almost midnight in the Philippines. There's Miles out there in God's country, along with Calgary, Alberta. Wonderful. I got lost. My wife, I don't know how you get lost in Calgary, Alberta, but on the interstate, but I did. But anyway, well, I thought we'd start out by maybe everybody just talking about if they've done any active imaginations and talk about that nothing happened or whatever, or something happened. What do you want to talk about some of your experiences, Sandy, to start out with?
Oh, okay. Well, I was intrigued when you said that you were stuck and your experience was, and tell me where I'm wrong, that you just saw dark space. Is that correct? Or empty space?
Well, yeah, when I first started doing this, that's all I saw was darkness. I don't see that very much anymore because I would do a jujitsu on it. I would do the pretending thing, okay, I'm not seeing anything. I'm going to see something whether anybody likes it or not, so then I would start to have just pretending to be this and be that. And pretty soon now I do have a felt sense, which is fairly strong, where I can actually see images. And this last week it got exceedingly rich, and Stuart was mentioning he is having some of this experience as well, where I mean, I'm not saying it's exceedingly rich, but it's much more rich and much more real.
Wow.
Than I've ever had it before this last week. The week before was pretty good too. But anyway, what else do you, what experience have you been having, Sandy?
Because I had the same experience, but what was interesting to me was I was in an active imagination and I got stuck in one part where I just wasn't getting it. I could feel it. It wasn't working. So what came to my mind was what you said about the dark space. So I thought, oh, okay, I'll just kind of go over there. And I borrowed that for a minute and I went into that dark space and just said, so what do you have to say to me? And it started to speak, yes. And it broke right through in my active imagination. It was freaking amazing. And so that broke through that. And then that active imagination kind of just continued through the week and just got more powerful. And anyway, I thought that was, for me, that was just really incredible to borrow somebody else's experience. And then that helped me break through mine.
Well, I actually told that one time to Jeffrey Raff. I mean, they were talking about what Jung called the cramps of consciousness, where he suggested painting, adding some richness of any kind that involves anything but the ego, and I mentioned, somebody was mentioning the blackness, and I said, Well, I just have a dialogue with the blackness and say, why is black? You know, and it would tell me that I did actually, I've been trying to get Jeffrey on with us. He's, you know, he's got he has some kind of illness that's something like, I don't know, it's just a nervous illness that is to do with his nerves. And but he did, I did ask him some questions about the case of Edward. And he did know Barbara Hanna, by the way, you know, and von Franz and all the other people. He came there about 71. But when we get to that, I'll just tell you the little bit he told me about the case of Edward. But so how about you, Adam? Have you been having any issues with or been doing actives or had any either tips or complaints?
So, you know, I've been a little bit like taking this almost, I don't know, laterally, you could say.
Yes.
I haven't read the RAF material, but I've been doing the, I've been doing work.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess one of the experiences I've also been, you know, trying to work more on the sensate aspect.
Yes.
And one thing I started doing yesterday even was dancing,
Mm-hmm.
and trying to embody in my body the images that I was perceiving during sort of a dream state, you know, something meaningful, an image that came. And that was very helpful because it really made the, I would say, made the experience much more real, you know, much more sort of embodied. You know, just one more thing.
Well, yeah, it's, you know, one thing that they say, the beings say, hi, Jordy and Jan, you know, nice to see you. Well, we're just going to all talk a little bit about any issues we'd had on active imagination. But one thing that I kind of forgot what I was going to say.
I was talking about dancing.
Stuart has been having a lot of luck, but I think Stuart has a little bit different path because he's been a Jordy. Yeah, did you have a comment? Oh, well, unmute yourself real quick. Yeah, unmute. Okay, now go ahead.
Sorry, because I am in a laptop without mouse. For how long can we share things? Because I have a statement, a very short one to make.
Can you say that again? I'm going to put my, I couldn't hear. Go ahead. No, I heard you, but it was a little too loud. Did anybody hear what he said?
He said he's just got a short statement to make.
Okay, go ahead, Jordy.
It's first and foremost to thank you for this effort and the existence of the group. And the reason is the following. I gone through the two books, the Barbara Hanna and the other one, Jeff Rapp. And at some point, everything has started to make sense to me, but I have to clear the desk and make inventory.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So to speak. And I went back to my learning experience through the way in the times I was reading Robert Moore and Gillette and that type of things, revisiting liminality, to make an inventory in order to make sense in with what page I am. And in some sort, the strange feeling, which I think is not particularly sick, that when things need to be revealed, they will. No hurry. To be open, to be attentive, and to prepare the house. And I am in that. Otherwise, I am concerned for the liminality issue. I mean, that's a practical thing. I am used to sitting meditation. And when I sit, I am trained, I am used to enter the Theravada type of meditation and disconnect. Otherwise, when I am laying in a bed, it's almost impossible. But when I am lying half asleep, things start to happen. And there is a voice, which in many ways is the superego, the same, calm down, calm down. It's a matter of rescheduling. And that's all. I am going to take this session and next one as audit, more as a participant.
Okay. All right. Well, that's fine. We're just all learning here.
Yeah, the thing
yeah.
is that to be aware of the existence of this group was some sort of a gift and trigger the things to happen. And
Yes.
it was the right thing in the right moment for me, okay?
Okay, fabulous. Okay, Stuart, why don't you talk about, you said that you've been experiencing something that you haven't experienced before or whatever. Why don't you describe that?
Well, I suppose it's just ongoing realizations of what it is that I'm working with, what this other realm or what it is. I had a couple of comments to do with just observations on, for the group itself, and then I have my own sort of insights. When I saw the subject matter of the email, and it's like, okay, this is what we're going to be doing today. I noticed two things immediately coming to mind. One probably is the most important was, I wonder what I could say about failure as progress.
Yes.
The experience of failure as progress. And as in the event of us experiencing, it didn't work or nothing happened. And then our next assumption immediately being that, I failed, it's not working, I'm no use, or whatever, this is not working. But to see it, to turn it around into progress being made is to see the looker, is to see the desire within us for it to be a certain way. And in a way, isn't it wonderful that it didn't work? Because had it worked, we would have just leapt onto the pony and trap, and off we go with it, blissfully unaware that it's us interpreting, us taking the material, bending it to our will, rather than being able to leave it as it is. So I think the experience of it not working is a very positive experience.
That's been my experience too. Is when nothing's working, I'm more determined, because what Raf says is no matter, he has never seen anyone fail who was persistent, but
exactly.
This thing here is the problem, and the more they say, as you experience us, we experience you, and the object is to have these inner beings become more and more real within us, and what happens is the center of awareness of our egos starts to become less and less centered in the outer ego, and it starts to move closer to the middle plane. And as it moves closer, as the inner world experiences us, because it hasn't experienced us before, other than passively, and as we experience it actively, that's when the center of gravity moves. But when I have a black day, a day with nothing happening, I just come back loaded for bear the next day. Well, I am going. Go ahead.
In terms of that, like nothing is progress or failure is progress, that type of state of mind, being happy to sit with the nothing. Then the next step, I would say, for somebody in that situation is stop taking it so seriously.
Mm-hmm.
Just work with this off the top of your head.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same as if you're gestalting your dream, or if you're using gestalt in the form of a creative, trying to find a creative solution, connecting with your creative center, if you like. That sort of, what's the first thing that happens off the top of your head? Releasing the person from pressure, their intellectual demand for quality. Do you know this sort of, oh, it must be absolutely right and it must be good. You know, I want to get to the center in one leap. You know, that's nonsense. It's not going to happen. So just off the top of your head, playfully working with something.
Playfully is the important word.
Imagination, literally. Yeah. So they were the two sort of things that I wanted to talk about, if you like, in terms of that. Now, why? I suppose the next observation I would bring to it is, in reading the emails that come out from the group, one of the things that I observe is the let's see how the right words for this would be, the intellectualization of the path, and how this you got to remember, this experience is going to come through your aliveness.
Mm-hmm.
It's coming from within you, and it's coming along with all of your other aliveness. So it's if we build an intellectual mind around it, we're basically putting a wall around it. What we should be doing is taking down the wall, not putting up the wall. Let's start applying simple terms to it. Let's start working with this in a really simple way. Let's leave our understanding of it until later on, until we're well down the path, and then start looking at what it is, how it is, what it means, and all that. Yeah, have a glance, but don't take it too seriously until we get down the path a bit. Because if we look at this through the eyes of a 10-year-old, like the reason why I'm able to approach the inferior function in myself is because I don't have that high threshold of consciousness. I'm not interested in those details. I'm not interested in the academic stuff, which is my relationship with a book. I'm much more interested in my relationship with what's happening within me, the blood and guts of it. And I think the more you can go downwards, the closer you're going to be to it. Don't be climbing ladders.
No, I just feel the descent is always the best thing. I mean, just dropping. You know, Jan in her sand play is doing exactly what Jung did to begin with. Is he just said, what was it I did as a child when there seemed to be no time, you know, and it was building things of little cities of stone. So he started to do that, you know, and at that point, the conscious mind started to go asleep, or, you know, move to the side. Okay. So that the images became more permeable to him, you know. And the one thing Rafa recommends too is as the initial preparatory exercise. And I think a feeling, the meditation before should be one of falling or descent or going into a cave or digging a hole, anything to symbolize to us that we're leaving the middle world, you know, we're going down, you know, but it was just to start writing, you know, and writing. And Barbara Hanna says that you say, well, I'm just making this all up. And she says, pretty soon you'll know you're not making it up. You know, it's coming from another source. Tim, do you have any comments?
Craig.
Yeah, go ahead, Stuart.
Sorry, one more thing. What I think would be perhaps a good suggestion, certainly I think it's a good suggestion, is have two pens.
Yes.
Have the pen you normally use and have a second pen that belongs to your 10-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
And when you pick up the second pen, shift your state of mind into that more simplified being, and leave your sort of higher functioning mind in the other pen. And like when I sit, my hands do this or my feet do that, and it becomes a sort of comfortable distraction for myself to go into. I need to distract my mind
Yes.
away from the immediacy of what's happening, because my mind is too observant on what's happening. So by having a sort of little message to herself by saying a second pen, maybe that might do it. If it's to do with writing or drawing, it just gives us that sort of little message to herself saying, keep away.
Yeah, and the
But
whole
that was the impression I got. When I read the emails, the one thing that strikes me about all the emails, and it's not a criticism, it's just an observation, is that they're all very, very intellectual.
Mhm.
Do you know? And it's like, well, that's not where the connection is going to be made. Guys, this is not about high intellect. It's about feeling. Come down into the felt sense. Don't judge it. Don't be having your sort of intellect present within the operation of it.
intellect
So,
is
and
is
there
the
you
most
go. Take what you want from that. Yep.
the intellect is the most is the function we should least be using. You know, we should be using feeling, intuition, and sensation, because those are the ones that modern man knows nothing about. Now, Tim, I know you write backwards. You have this wonderful ability to write backwards.
Yeah, I don't use that very often just because it takes a lot of attention.
Yeah.
And I've generally only done that with my muse
Mhm.
that I really want to give a, like Stuart was saying, a different kind of voice. And I've done it maybe the last few months, but not recently. But what we're talking about today, the difficulties, is really helpful for me today, because I've been trying to dialogue this week with two very dark dream figures that just would not say anything to me. I mean, one was just incredibly insulting and just calling me an idiot, and you know, I couldn't get any dialogue going. And maybe I think Stuart has got a great idea. Maybe just deal with the emotion, you know.
Well, go through it. I mean, they have to have what they call the sit down. You know, there's a German word for that. You know, the sit down, where we really go at each other, and you tell him off too. You know, and then he tells you off, and then if the other one won't even talk, go into his eyes and look at yourself, and then tell yourself what you would say if you were him.
Well, that's what I tried to do, but then it just dried up. And one of them is this older woman, and for me, the image of the older woman is always wise and compassionate, you know. But she had me by the lapels, and she was just shaking me, yelling at me, and I was really lost. I'm just trying to say, okay, I can't hear what you're saying, you know. It just didn't come. It just didn't come.
I would match. Now, I'm just throwing this out there. I'm not an expert, okay, but I think what Jung would say, and I'm just guessing, I'd have no evidence for this, is that he said he would meet her in kind. You know, he would come at her as hard as she's coming at you. You know, and to try to get an equality of both sides. You know,
well,
you don't want the
sense to me.
Yeah, the one side. There needs to be that's the one thing about. Now, I'll just mention, just as a reminder, the object of doing this is to create your own mythic system, your own system of meaning, and your own religion. You know, it's the religion of personal experience, and where you're informed by the other world, and you start to be the vehicle of the dialogue of both worlds, rather than just living in the ordinary reality of the ego world. That is the object of this whole exercise, is to be informed by have a dialogue with the other world, and then something is created that was never there before. It's something. It's a new birth. It's the birth of what would be, you're creating is the personal myth, is the philosopher's stone. You know, you're creating the Holy Grail, which is now you become, Jung says, a living tabernacle. You know, a tabernacle, you know, was something that they carried around in Sinai because they didn't have any temples. It was this moving temple, you know, with artifacts in it. And the object of all of this is to become the living tabernacle of the center and of the outer world, and then creating the third. But go ahead, Tim. I just wanted to.
Well, it seems to me that you're right. I'm sort of hanging on to my own persona, and I'm a person who's, you know, very gentle and nonviolent. And so whenever I'm approached with any kind of force, you know, I generally just become secure in myself and kind of quiet and confident. And I think I need to step out of that persona. I think it would really help me to just be able to let loose and be on paper the kind of person that I hate to deal with.
Well, you need them to be reasonable, so you need to come at them and be match their energy. Stuart, did you have something?
Yeah, I think that dream, you could work with that dream very simply in a Gestalt way, and it just by bringing it to life. So if you brought it out into the front room of your house and just lived it, just become it. So, you know, if I was the therapist and you're the client and that was the dream you had, I'd suggest, okay, I want you to meet this person and let them shake you. And in the shaking, you know, I might ask, well, what age are you now? Or what size are you? Or what size are you? What size are they? Start asking questions of the situation. So you're gaining environmental knowledge, even though you're not getting direct knowledge. You're getting sort of environmental knowledge. Okay, how old is the person? How old are you? How long have they been trying to shake you? Now that they have you, you know, do you have any sense of what they feel like? Are they happy that they have you? Or, you know, all these sort of questions. There's a myriad of questions. But most importantly, I'd invite you to complete the process and allow yourself to be shaken, perhaps down onto the floor or wherever you end up in the room. You might be in a corner, you might be in the center of the room. And then I would get you to speak as her from the shaken position. So you're lying on the ground, haven't had the life shaken out of you. And I would get you to speak as her and to experience your shakenness as her shakenness, which is what she's trying to communicate to you, perhaps. And you saying, well, you know, you're a gentle soul and you're not that sort of person. Well, where do you think your emotions are going if they're not coming through you? Do you know? So she might be really trying to get your attention, saying, you know, you're in your gentleness, but you're really shaking me up.
Maybe you need to injure. Yeah.
By bringing it to life, you bypass the need to understand any of it. By acting it out in a playful way or in a creative way, you bypass the need to put meaning on any of it until afterwards. And then you can look at it from all angles. But then you have a whole load of information to work with.
That's great.
So literally,
that's really helpful.
In 2 minutes, you could have that dream completely unwrapped.
And it's kind of like Jacob wrestling the angel, you know. Maybe we need to injure a hip or something in the process to get the message, you know. But Jacob, you know, wrestled the angel to a standstill. You know, he didn't just sit there and let it. You know, he's coming back at it.
Yeah,
well,
one of my sculptures of Jacob wrestling the angel, the angel has this broken wing, so he's really been decimated, you know, but the two of them are still at it. So I think that's a good metaphor.
Yeah. Well, and anyway, and remember, Ivan, again, tips or issues.
So I tried, we talked about that dream last night, and I tried going from the perspective, like doing an active imagination from the perspective of the dog.
Mm-hmm.
That was really interesting. Like I'm still beginning with it, and I found some of Jeffrey Rath's techniques maybe just how would I put it, a little out of reach for me. I was struggling with them, so I decided to kind of just keep things really simple. So I just did a meditation where I just thought about what it would be like from the perspective of this other creature in my dream, and the images come really easy to me. I was able to see kind of different images from a different perspective in my dream, almost like my unconscious was filling in some gaps. But the feeling aspect of it was more difficult for me to get into touch with. I've been finding that I've been liking to draw my dreams a lot. Oftentimes, I don't know, I'm a little bit of a perfectionist, so I still sometimes end up just throwing them out. But even that, I don't think any of that matters. It's just the process of just trying to engage with it on a more unconscious level for me, which is drawing, right? It's more of a feeling level. And think about it in those terms, I start to have a better connection with the ideas of it without, as Stuart was saying, intellectualizing it so much, as I feel like I'm more interacting with it more. And through that process of just that interaction and trying to bring it into my life, I've been feeling like I've been getting more dreams and more vivid dreams. And for me, none of it's been, I haven't been trying to judge them or think about what they mean or anything like that so much. I just try to understand some symbols in them and think about the symbols and what those symbols could mean. But as we've been saying in that dream group, more from an objective place than trying to put any labels on it. So that's been my experience so far.
And you know, the drawing, like Stuart said, is a seeing, not an understanding. So it is, and it is an act of imagination to draw it. You're lending your attention to the images. And not only that, you're making it manifest and real and concrete in the outer world, which is is a symbolic representation of what we're trying to do in the inner world, is to make those personifications conscious, you know, and you know, by lending them our attention, by doing sand play, by doing art, by doing anything. It reminds me of one extra image I got out of Stuart's dream, and is where he goes to a church and he goes up to the upper level, and when they sing, the chorus sings, the Monopoly game below starts to play, and when they stop singing, it stops. Well, it's sort of lending attention to these figures. They start to move. You know, Jung said, if you stare at the God long enough, he speaks.
Yeah, so I feel like the images come pretty easily to me, and I feel like I've made good progress just in the sense of lending attention to all this has made it become more of a part of my life, and it's unraveling itself. But I do want to start to get more into the felt sense of it than just the images. I think that'll be sort of maybe a next step for me. And we'll see how long that takes. But and I'm not in any rush on any of this.
When we're done here, I'll tell you what Jeffrey Raff said about, you know, I was asking about the richness and the incredible wild characters in the case of Edward. And I was asking him, how did this happen? How do you think this Edward guy actually happened? You know, and of course it took 18 months, and he's dreaming the dream on of one dream, you know, spent 18 months on it, you know, and he tells me a little bit, and I'll tell you a little bit later. But how about you, Gary? I mean, again, just either issues or tips that you have.
Well, the dream stuff has been going pretty well as far as I can get into the other characters, and you know, I might start with something that just doesn't make any sense at all, and in the end I'll be like, oh, that's got to be it. But then, you know, so I did, you know, I go in for this Reiki, and at one point, you know, I've been doing that for, I don't know, 3 years or so, 4 years. And at one point, she said, look, I think you need to learn this. So, I did her course and I worked on it. But I've been getting sort of felt sense types of things from that. And like at one point, she said, well, I see a donkey. I don't know what this is about. And I'd been having problems because I'd do the Reiki and then I would just be totally ungrounded. I mean, worthless for the rest of the day. And so, I'd use like this, I'd keep this animal with me and the donkey would kind of keep me grounded. So then I thought, well, and I've also got, the Chihuahua, that, I can't remember if this, the Chihuahua took me on a really good journey. And so I thought, well, I'm going to bring these animals with me sometimes, like if I'm just out walking or whatever. And so in that, mostly I'm aware, but I'm creating them and stuff. I mean, this is by far and away the normal case. But I'm like, okay, I'm creating them. I know it, but it's a good exercise. But the other day I was out riding and the donkey was really angry, because it didn't want to go that fast, so it was chewing me out. So, yeah, I mean, that's kind of my, what I like about this is it's all kind of stupid and at the level of a 10-year-old. You can tell my animals are pretty dumb. I mean, neither Chihuahuas or donkeys are particularly known for their intelligence,
Yeah, well, that still is, when I ever get one of those, I seize it and I won't let it go. I mean, it's just this glimpse of something and I stop and grab it, and I'm not going to let it go, and why did I see this? What is the object of that? One thing I've been seeing lately is suddenly I'm on a road, a mountain road, and there is, and this has happened several times, there's all kinds of construction trucks ahead of me. There's no way I can get forward, and it's just an interesting image. The way is open, except there's blockages in the road, but anyway, Miles, and now this is not a homework assignment, but if you have done any active imaginations and you have any issues or tips for everybody.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just meditating. One of the tips you shared, I don't know, a couple sessions ago, I suppose, was you said, I believe Jeffrey Raff, or maybe this was your own, that put out some items, surround yourself with some items that will maybe help bring you into the active imagination state and the creative process. So I did that. And one of the things I did was our mutual friend, Skip Conover, he is into developing calligraphy. And so I guess late last year, he said, anybody want a piece of my calligraphy work? I'll gladly send it to you. So I said, okay, send me one. I'd be pleased and honored. So he sent me this, and I framed it, but it wasn't on the wall. And then I also, on the wall that I have by my desk, I had put up all these pictures of dogs. And it dawned on me, oh, I should put Skip's calligraphy of the eternal moment, Jung's quote, the eternal moment, on the wall, because I'm looking at that at my work desk. And then with the dogs, I'm reminded of our mutual friend Khushbu from India. And then I have a box that I call my a bundle, and it reminds me of a Cree friend, Standing Stone, who passed away. This coffee mug reminds me of him because I was going to have coffee with Standing Stone to talk about a potential collaboration. So I think doing that is very powerful and creates an energy around me. So that's the tip. And then the issue And I won't take too much more time, but I was sitting in my chair in my living room, and I was just allowing myself to go very deep into thought. One of the things that has been on my mind quite a bit since I'll take it back to listening and reading of Russell Means, a Lakota man, founder of the American Indian movement. He was rather a prominent figure in American politics in the 70s. He was part of a group that took over Alcatraz Island and saying this is First Nations territory, that we want this island. So anyway, Russell Means is the person I credit to with first opening my thinking to the concept of matriarchal and matrilineal. You know, prior to that, I was, you know, I knew of feminists and such, but not thinking deeply. So not to draw this out too long, but in this chair, when I was sitting there, I just started to think about what would it feel like to be a woman, a woman having a uterus and the potential to create life in me and carry another human being. And it just freaked me out because I sort of went there, you know, I just like, ooh, wow. It was like, and I basically shook myself out of that state because it had such an impact. So anyway, I just share that. I don't know if you call that active imagination because it was very fast.
Yeah. Did you have a comment, Adam?
Yeah, I just wanted to say it's interesting because this past week, like I've been dreaming with an anima figure and doing meditations, but I also had I had bodily experiences similar to that of being a woman, you know, in the parts that are different than my body that a woman has. And it's been very interesting and useful, actually, I would say. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've tried, you know, with I'm only communicating at this point with feminine figures, you know, and I do, when I go there, I try to occupy their body, and I know at least the one, Barbello, she was supposed to have been, you know, the mother of the Savior, and I tried to have her let me experience the birth of God within her, you know, and that was somewhat like what he was saying. You know, the one, Michael Harner, who was the shamanic scholar, would always have everyone go out and get about 5 or 6 things from nature and bring it in to themselves when they were going to do a very important act of imagination. And, you know, I actually have this idea at some point, I'd like to go do one in an ancient burial ground. Maybe I'll do that this summer. But anyway, Kevin, how about you? Any issues or tips?
Well, I have to admit, I haven't done active imagination now these days, but I have done active imagination in the past, or I like to think it's active imagination. And I also feel like it also comes forth here in that we are different personality types. And for me, writing, introvert intuition is more difficult for me because I'm an intuitive. Like I'm mostly extroverted intuitive more than introverted intuition, which is like essentially the dream language. And so for me, it has been writing, and so it has been active imagination with a shadow figure. I have some figures I want to do active imagination, but I haven't started that because I know once I start that, it's going to be somewhat quite serious. But my shadow figure, yes, so when I do so, there is a point it can come stoppages. Like, you know, it comes a point that it can say something. When I say something, it's just, you know, obviously I feel like I'm making this up. But there comes a point where it stops. It's like a complex, you know, it stops. The energy stops. And So for me, it's just been to wait a bit and start again. And I feel like, no, this is not going anywhere. Wait a bit, start again. Wait a bit, start again. And for me, it's been also about, it has to be a dream figure. You know, it has to be grounded in something. And yes, you know, complexes has sort of animas and energy. So yeah, and it has been very helpful to bring my shadows into conscious awareness. I think that's, for me, has been the most healing part. And but I don't know if that makes any sense.
Well, dealing with your grief first, that's something Stuart mentions. You know, I often, if I'm getting in a blockage or anything, and I sometimes, I can always hold my hand out and ask for the anima to take my hand, you know, and then come close to me, and then come with me, you know. And what I feel I'm bringing with me is my inferior function, because is my inferior function, and she is now responsive enough. And then I also was saying last night, I'd look at her and I'd say, show me your shining face. And every time I get a glimpse of this wonderful, radiant smile, you know. So I mean, that's been helpful to me. Louis, are you doing any active imaginations, or do you have any comments, either tips or issues or anything you know about that you want to speak about?
Well, I would mention that we all know that we have an inner world, but what's often forgotten that we not only have a soul within us, but there's also the world soul. And all of us are contained within that world soul. Indeed, all of creation and every ego that has lived or is currently living is contained within that world soul. And that the substance that makes up our inner soul is the same substance that makes up the outer world of creation. And so my tip would be to remember the middle path that's referred to in Buddhism, and that every step that we take in our inner world, we need to also take an equivalent step in our outer world so that we experience the middle path, or what is known in the East as Tao. The outer world is very important because we would have no cognition of our inner world without the outer world, a living body, and our own ego. And Dr. Jung demonstrated this with the Red Book, where he had all these visions through active imagination, but he didn't let it stand at that. He created in the outer world all of these great illuminations and sculptures. And I believe that this helped him create a balance in his life.
He never left his feet on the ground. I mean, he always seemed to be like Prometheus, that he was not going to allow himself to be either suffer an inflation or to be dissolved in that. And, you know, I think that was somewhat symbolized in the vision of he had with his father of when he was in the temple of Uriah, who was this very vague anonymous figure who was killed by David after David had sex with his wife, who was one of his generals. He had Uriah killed so that he wouldn't get in trouble, you know, brought him up against some, but somehow Jung and his father were at the temple of Uriah. And I don't know what the explanation for that is, but, you know, Jung or his father says, bow down, and he puts his forehead on the ground, and Jung stopped an inch short So he was maintaining his human position, which is very consistent with what he later learned from alchemy, is where Hermes says the strength is perfected when it returns to the earth. If we don't integrate and assimilate this in a dialogue, and we're not asking to be, they're not asking us to worship them. They're asking us to have a dialogue with them, and then through relentless memory, integrate and assimilate both the images that we had a dialogue about and the dialogue itself, and that's the way the center of gravity starts to shift, Jan, do you anything else, Louis?
No, that's all I have.
Okay. Now, Jan, would you like to share anything, because you're so talented? Just a little, maybe a few words, or not? You don't have to.
Yes, I can just tell you. Thank you for that. Craig. Having gone back and watched the first two of your videos, I'm learning that I'm not developing a relationship with these inner figures, and I know that that's what active imagination is. And I might be doing art therapy, but I'm not necessarily doing active imagination. And I think there's a difference. And the other thing I wanted to say was, I was taking pictures of my sand trays and showing them to my brother, because we're really close. And he loved interpreting the symbols, and then I started to find that it got in the way of my work with the unconscious. So I think sometimes when I let other things come in, I end up stopping myself. So I just wanted to share that. I still do share them with my brother, because he knows me in very more than anyone, but that is something that I have to work with myself. So, but thank you for everything.
Yeah, well, your images are wonderful. I mean, and sand play is something we want to discuss at some point, definitely.
Yeah, it's like you, it's my inferior function, and that's partly why it's just I have to touch something to get there,
Well, that is actually knowing the other side and having the other side come in to know you. Well, now, is there any final words? Go ahead, Tim.
Jan, you're talking about the sensing as your inferior function?
Yes, she's said that.
So I keep hearing this. I wonder how many of us have sensing as the inferior function.
Me.
I certainly do.
I do.
Yeah,
Gary. Not everybody's done their psychological type, evidently, but just a quick summary is there is one function which is our go-to way of navigating in the world, and two of them are have to do with they call it the judging, but it's actually something that is more in the conscious area, and the other two are called the perceiving functions. Those are the two that just happen to us, and that's like intuition and sensation. So since I'm an intuitive, then my unconscious function, which my ego consciousness has no access to, is sensation, and that is, I get lost everywhere I go. I lose everything I have. I eat unconsciously. I'm always, I go up to an ATM, I put my card in, take it out. Then I don't take my money, and then I go back about 30 seconds later, somebody's already yanked it, So anyway, it's sort of oblivious to what's happening more than 3 inches around the bubble that's around yourself, But anyway, the other two are thinking and feeling, and they are more open to the ego. I mean, they don't just happen to us. We put some input. Now,
I have a question for Lewis.
Yes.
Talking about the being aware of the world soul. And I'm wondering if he could talk about the difference between the world soul and the collective unconscious.
Did you want to handle that, Lewis? So the anima
I'm
mundi.
sorry, it takes me forever.
Yeah.
I have
Okay.
to go from mute to unmute and back. Well, there's also not just the collective unconscious, there's also collective consciousness. For example, we see that in political movements and also contemporary religious movements, or the lack of religious movements. But we carry with ourselves biological DNA of everything that came before us. And we also carry that psychic DNA. And I would say that it is that is contained within the world soul collectively. Dr. Jung's first mantra that appears in the Red Book is really a depiction of the world soul. Craig, you know what I mean. The system.
Yes. Right.
And it's very ancient. Dr. Jung painted this around the time of the creation of the Red Book, but Plato had done one, and Pythagoras had done one, and Newton had done one, and it's a very real phenomenon. But sometimes in our quest for individual realization, we forget that we're part of a whole and that we're contained within that whole. We can't escape the rest of humanity.
You know, Teilhard de Chardin called it the noosphere.
Yes,
you know?
exactly.
I mean, yeah, it's when the collective unconscious is more of a latent potentiality. The either the anima mundi, the world soul, or the noosphere is the living moment of the Tao that we're unconscious of, but it's the collective voice of everyone alive now. You know,
Yes.
and
that's very good, Craig. I had forgotten all about the noosphere. I'm familiar with Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, who was a world-renowned anthropologist who was present with the team that discovered the Peking man. He was also a Jesuit priest and very learned in church dogma. And his book was one of the last books that was read by Dr. Jung before his death. And when Dr. Jung's friend Miguel Serrano visited Dr. Jung just prior to Dr. Jung's birth, he was greeted by Dr. Jung when he entered Bollingen with Dr. Jung wearing a Japanese robe. And next to his nightstand was the phenomenon of man. And Miguel Serrano inquired about it, and Dr. Jung said he had just read it, and then his face turned ashen white, and he said, "It's a great book." And it is very similar, though from a different perspective, than The Secret of the Golden Flower, because it encapsulates the very essence of Dr. Jung's body of work, although it's from the perspective of an anthropologist who embraced the theory of evolution and combined it with the church teachings surrounding us being children of God.
kind of like with the astrological ages, you know, there's an aspect there. He doesn't really mention it, but it's again, it's the evolution of not of biology, but of the spiritual consciousness of man.
Interior Desjardins' view, it's both simultaneously.
Right.
The biological evolution from a unicellular organism to what we are today, but at the same time being endowed with a soul with the capacity not just of consciousness, but of self-reflection, a singular element of human life that gives us dominion over the earth.
It's really mind-blowing book, and it's very accessible. You know, the French people of this ilk, you know, Henri Bergson, Henri Corbin, Teilhard de Chardin, I mean, they're just beautiful, and they seem to have a wonderful access because maybe they are from the, you know, the psychological type of the city of light. You know, they have some unknown access. Now we're just going to move on real quick, unless Jordy or go ahead, Amber or Louis.
Well, you know that Dr. Jung had this correspondence and friendship with Victor White.
Yes.
Who was also a priest.
Yes.
It beggars the imagination that while he was a contemporary with Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, they never had any direct contact with each other at all.
Can I just add something very quickly?
Go ahead, Kevin. Yes.
It's very important. Tim, I don't know if you have seen, and you probably have already, by Edvard Munch's painting. And one of my favorite painting of Edvard Munch is called Madonna. Yes. And Madonna is an image of this female. And I think to answer your question, at least for me, it was to stay with that image, to stay with the image of Madonna. And if you stay with it long enough, I think that could best answer your question. It was just it.
Yes.
Well, that's a great suggestion, and I'm haunted by those images of dark women that come particularly out of the era of about the 1880s, when in Western culture the spiritualism was starting to make a big impact, and tonalism in painting, and that figure of this dark earthy woman started appearing in the work of many Western artists, and I haven't seen anything quite like that since then. It's fascinating. So thanks for that suggestion. I'll look at that stuff again.
Well, we'll quickly go over the images of the case of Edward, but does either Jordy or Stuart want to give any closing comments on what we've discussed?
Here you have the Dark Madonna of Munch.
Yes. Yeah, that I actually got a picture. Do you got that? You have actually a copy of it. I got a copy. I was trying to find my wife. I have a picture of her standing beside it that we just took a year ago. But go ahead. Yeah, that is beautiful. How did you just happen to have that, Jordy?
Well, because I have my laptop for the teleconference because it has a camera, and that's my desk.
Oh, okay.
And that's from Wikipedia, which has good images. And this is my balcony. I live in a
beautiful. Yeah, you have a sea view, ocean view.
No, that's Madrid, but it's reasonably high. As jokingly someone said, you have changed inner life for an external flat somehow.
Oh, okay.
Sounds more, say, comic in Spanish. Very little to add. It was resonating many things I heard when you were talking about the Noosphere and Teilhard de Chardin and company. Reminds me to the notion of big mind, big heart, connected to the Zen thing. And it's something that I experienced occasionally, but not alone. It was in meditations directed by somebody else's. But that's another story. I'll write about that.
Okay. All right. Stuart, do you have any comments? And then I'll just quickly just go through the figures of the case of Edward. And of course, anybody can jump in. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, no, the only comment I'd make is just to remember that we're living fully in our world and they're living fully in their world. And the relationship between us and them can only develop when we walk towards them as they walk towards us. So in a sense, the relationship for us is a process of undoing. We have to dismantle something of our elaborate structure because that serves us well in this world, but it doesn't serve us too well in the connection or in the meeting with them. We have to simplify what we are. So stripping ourselves back down in a sense is a good practice. You know, we can talk about stuff afterwards, but in the actual meeting, it's like, well, how stoop can you low, or how low can you stoop? How stoop can you low? You know, it's like, you know, let's go in there naked rather than fully dressed. And I think it's just a thought, you know, that not to expect them to come all the way into this world at the first meeting. It's not possible. You know,
They would like to, but they would like to, but we won't let them. You know, we're
yeah, I just don't think it's possible.
No.
I think the screen of our mind is too opaque.
Yes.
You know, we're cultured into surviving in this world, so we keep things out. You know, what we don't like, we keep out. What we don't recognize, we keep out. And we want to understand it, but more so, we want to control it by understanding it, or through our understanding of it. So, you know, I think we got to let them speak to us, and we got to meet them in their space. You know, which is to learn how to be quiet, both, you know, in our attitude and in our mental attitudes, in that meeting environment, and then see what happens. So, you know, it's just remembering what it is.
I'm sorry, when you're referring to them, are you referring to the dead?
To the inner figures.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the inner figures are living. We actually, if Stuart doesn't mind, we actually had one tell us that today, that they are they are as alive as we are, you know, and that we need to know that. But and I was going to mention, you know, there's one other thing. Well, anyway, I can't remember what it was. I'll get it to it in a second. But let me just go through these figures in case of Edward, and unless anyone else wants to jump in, feel free. But I just wanted to go through this case of Edward, and I thought we'd go through a few of the active imaginations of Barbara Hanna. We won't go through the Anna Marjula one again, you know, but it's a wonderful. You should read it. But we spent about 8 weeks on that already. But anyway, you know, the case of Edward is where he was a 42-year-old author, and he had suddenly developed a case of impotence. Now, he was a friend of Jung, and you know, he was actually a patient of one of Jung's students, and he was told to start doing active imaginations, and you know, he did it based on one dream and spent 18 months on it and doing what Jung originally called active imagination. He came up with that word, I believe, at the Tavistock lectures, if I'm maybe Stuart knows, but I think that was the first time he mentioned it, the actual word. But you know, the dream that he dreamed on was this. He says, I am wandering round in an unknown great city where I suddenly find myself in a brothel. At first, I am in a kind of entrance, a bar, where I'm flirting with two pretty young prostitutes. Then a woman of a very different kind comes towards me. She's exceedingly beautiful with a serious, intelligent expression. Her tall, well-made figure is entirely swathed in black silk. Her coal black hair is combed back severely, and her black eyes are flashing. She lowers her eyes until they meet mine, slowly raises her glass as if to drink to my health and says, "A bientôt." See you soon. Now that was the dream that he did the active imagination on. And we find out later that because of his his mother died when he was very young, and she was always very cold to him. And then his father was even colder after she died. In fact, his father wouldn't allow her to have any medical attention. Who knows? It was the early teens in Europe, but I don't know whether they could have done anything for her anyway. I'm guessing she had breast cancer. But anyway, so he had a very unusual relationship to the feminine, very unusual, and he was his only relation, since he even though he had a family and some children and everything, he still the only way that he felt he could connect with the feminine was through pornographic fantasies. And the reason that then the anima tells him later, I was the one that gave you impotence. I was trying everything I could do to get your attention, and you wouldn't give it to me. So the only way I could get it through you is to make you give you impotence. And it was that broke his connection with the negative mother complex. This Barbara Hanna says she was giving him all this sweetened poison, and he wouldn't, and until he couldn't resist her until the fact of the impotence came along. Then he had this dream, and then he started the active imagination. And the active imagination is really a story. In fact, Anna Marjula's was a similar case where she had a very unusual relationship with her parents, and solved it through her active imagination. But I just wanted to go through these characters really quickly, because we don't have to go through the whole thing, although it's a tremendous tale. All right. Okay. I'll see you guys in a bit. Okay. Well, anyway, let's start out with the shadow. Okay. Now he sees her, and he dreams the dream on, and he gets in a fight with this beautiful woman in black silk, and she finally is going to leave him and saying, you're the reason I'm imprisoned in this brothel. And in fact, you find every anima or every figure in there is either a witch or imprisoned because of his very strange relationship with the feminine. They are all need liberation, and so anyway, she's about ready to leave because he's suddenly being, has one of these prostitutes sit on his lap and says, let's go upstairs. And the devil is telling him, hey, look at that woman in the black silk. Wouldn't you like to see her without her clothes on? And she sees this look on his eyes, and she's about ready to leave. And he knows he must follow her. And he says, I'm sorry. I can't control it. And she says, well, you need to control your heart. Then she leaves, and she goes, and he follows this circuitous descent with her, which lasts forever. And it's amazing that in someone's active imagination, I don't know if you've ever done this, but nothing happens. You're just walking. And I've done 45 minutes one time of just nothing but going forward, and not getting anywhere, but I'm not gonna stop until somebody tells me to stop, or something happens. And so anyway, then he goes down. There's a boat waiting for him on the river, or on some kind of body of water. And there's a veiled boatman, okay? And they get in the boat, and they set off, and there's complete darkness. they go through, he falls asleep, he wakes up in a thunderstorm, and the boatman steers right for the storm, and it scares him, and then suddenly a sheet of flame pops up, and he goes right for the center. The boatman goes right for the center of the sheet of flame, and then suddenly in the sheet of flame he sees two stars. They're two blue eyes, and it is his God, and it's the spirit of fire, water, wind, and ice. Now, I want to tell you something about fire, water, wind, and ice. What are the four elements? You know, it's fire, water, air, and earth. Okay, so you got fire and water. You know, got fire's transformation, water's fluidity, and then wind is pneuma, or the air, and then ice is a very strange kind of earth. Now, if you are, it's a solid, but it's not earth, okay? It's some kind of, you have no earth, and your God has no earth. His God has no earth, okay? What? That's because he has no relationship with the feminine at all, you know? So his earth is not differentiated. That's a kind of a weird, but it's beautiful. And now I want to tell you what Jeffrey Raff told me. I just asked him, where in the hell did this thing come from, and how did it develop? You know, I mean, you know, I have the same questions about the visions of Christiana Morgan. How did he experience these? You know, and I asked him, do you think it was because that he just started to write a story? Because this was the way Barbara Hanna would do it. He just started to write a story, and then at each point he would say, well, what happens next? And he would sit and wait until there was a little bit of a image, and he just kept following the little images that kept coming. And so it didn't just pour out of him. You know, it took 18 months for this to happen. And even though Jeffrey Raff knew Barbara Hanna and, you know, has read all her books, he didn't remember the case of Edward. But he said that even for beginners or great practitioners, that's a great way of active imagination. But he says, if you really do it with attention, he says, it does take a long, long time, you know, because you don't just, you can let it pour out, but it needs to pour out with attention, that you're not using the conscious attitude. And Barbara Hanna said she could tell that this was all from the unconscious, because he's always in trouble. He's very weak, and he's certainly not a hero, you know, in the whole thing. But the boatman turns out later to be his shadow. He finds it out at the end. You know, it's the exact opposite of Edward, who is good-mannered and gentlemanly. This is a primitive man with animal qualities, who eats like an animal. And she says it's very unusual that he meets the anima before he meets the shadow. Usually you always have to meet the shadow first, you know. But anyway, that's the first figure. The second figure, well, the second figure, the first figure was the guide. Then the guide has a task for him after he's seen the spirit of fire, water, wind, and ice looking at him, which is his God. He's scared to death. And she's saying, no, this is very positive. It looks like he has a task for you, or a quest. And he says he's very scared of that. And she says, well, you should be scared. And in no circumstance do you ever not do what he says, okay? But anyway, she has a task for him to go and rescue a woman who's trapped in a volcano. Now we're going to meet 4 anima in this thing, and this isn't. I don't know. We don't have too much. Well, I got 10 minutes here, but he's going to meet 4 anima, and the first one was the guide. The second one, he goes and rescues from the volcano. She's called 4 Eyes. She's a woman with 4 eyes. she's trapped in a cave, also imprisoned because of Edward's very poor relationship with the feminine. Okay, so he rescues her. She's got 4 eyes, you know, so she is a more archetypal feminine than the guide, who's his personal anima. She's an anima, but she's a more archetypal anima. She's the anima of the self, not of the unique self. Remember, the self, we have a unique self. It's not the anima mundi or the world soul. It's our unique self, and it's the anima of the self. And she doesn't give a hoot about Edward. In fact, if it was up to her, she'd kill him. But the guide convinces her. She says, no, the self has a liking for him. The self likes Edward and has him a quest. So she tolerates him. Okay. And her eyes, by the way, her 4 eyes, which flash like fire, are red, green, blue, and yellow. Feeling, red, green, sensation, blue, thinking, and yellow, intuition. And so and now remember, this came up in his active imagination. You know, this is wonderful. But anyway, she is the one who wants to kill the witch who has imprisoned everyone and who was created by his negative mother complex. Okay, this was the one who gave him the poison sweetness and kept him from having a good relationship with the feminine. So then suddenly there's a second boat, and so when they get down, they're going to the island of the witch. And the witch is the negative mother. You know, there's a young witch and an old witch, and the old witch devours people and eats little children, and the young witch is the one who gets us to be cocaine addicts or alcoholics. You know, the young witch is the negative anima. The old witch is the negative eternal feminine or mother. She's the negative mother, and she's devours. And the other one. So they're going to this island. Okay, now this is so beautiful. They go to the island. It's very hard to get to, and then they find a dove, and the dove is also an anima. Now this is the anima of Eros. The anima of the Eros is the dove. It was called the bond of love, the vinculum amoris, and she is, when she comes along, and this I was telling my wife this morning. When the dove comes along, who's the bond of love, who's Eros, he has such a low differentiation of the feminine that Eros to him is an animal. It's a bird, you know. I mean, that's because he's never differentiated the Eros, which is the bond of love. It's not sex, you know. That's what Barbara Hanna says. She says that Jung said about Eros: men think they possess a woman when they have had sex with her. She says, Jung said, you never possessed her less, because all she cares about is Eros, the relatedness and the bondedness, because it's sacred to her. And really the ritual of union is sacred to her. And to the male, it is it's something, since he's so spiritual, you know, he denigrates the body, and there's nothing sacred about it to him. It's something that just happens, and then he goes on like he doesn't even know this woman. So I mean, he's, you know, this is an aspect. But yeah, go ahead.
When you say he, who are you talking about?
What can you refresh my memory? What I said?
You're talking about, I don't know if you're talking about Jung or you're talking about this Edward, but you said he doesn't understand that.
Oh no, just I'm talking about me. I'm talking about men in general.
About a man.
Yeah, a man.
Oh, I see.
Yeah,
Okay.
men tend to not take the union with the other sex in the sacred manner that the woman views it. She views it as more of almost a spiritual experience, where a man considers it a descent into the body that has nothing to do with his logos psychology. I mean, he considers that to be almost a sullying of his, high spiritual level, where the woman considers that she has brought spirit into her and united with it. So she's looking at it at a different level than the man does. And so anyway, that's Edward has such a terrible differentiation of the feminine in his life. He doesn't, his eros is a dove, But I was telling my wife this too, is the devil suddenly loses its power over Edward when the dove appears, okay? And the devil is the personification of the archetype of the ego, okay? Wrap your head around that. It is when the ego is involved in the power principle of controlling and of not yielding, what has manifested is the devil, okay? That's what the devil is. But when Eros appears, the bond of love, she defangs the ego. Now the ego becomes not controlling and yielding, So the devil is depotentiated when Eros appears in the form of the dove. Then they meet one of the most interesting characters in the whole thing is the hunchback, who's the Kabiri. He's the daemon of the underground, and he is creative. He's the creative force. The creative force are dwarves. There's Jung had a dream when he was about ready to discharge Tony Wolff, which hopefully we'll read about when the protocols are published in a year or two. He was going to discharge her, but then he had a dream that the dwarves kidnapped Tony Wolff, and while they were singing, they were going to take her into the mountain, and she would never be seen again. And so he knew that he could not let go of Tony Wolff because she was his creative spirit. And since he had rejected her or was going to reject her, the creative spirits, the Kabiri, the hooded dwarves, were taking her back into their mountain. But think of this, that the creative spirit is the repulsive dwarf hunchback. And that's because we are not, people are not the creators of the divine things that come into being in the world through song, through art. We're only the conduit of them. So to emphasize that or to illustrate that, they're saying the creative force, the creative daemon in Edward is a hunchback. Not only a hunchback, but a hunchback whose head has been split apart and then sewed back together. So, but what's funny is Eros, the dove, and the hunchback are best buddies. They absolutely are totally united. And it also says the shadow is the counterpart of the hunchback. Now, I don't understand that yet. I'm going to have to think about that. I don't know what she means by that. But anyway, well, maybe we'll finish this next time. Does anybody have any let's anybody who wants to make any comments, and we'll finish up the case of Edward next time. Just the figures, because there is I don't have enough time to finish it. But what do you think about this, and also about writing a story? I think that was my theory of how this active imagination came about. I wanted Jeffrey Graff to tell me it was, and he says, I don't know, but it's doable. Go ahead. Sandy?
Oh, I just wanted to, the creative force is really interesting. And I was thinking that when I worked as a therapist, Jung had a quote that profoundly affected me. And it was that when he met with someone, he let go of all of his tools and he listened to the creative force within the person. And that really changed the way I worked with people. And sometimes even, I mean, well, yeah, the way I work with myself too, is that I think that there's many tools out there and they're really great. And, you know, you can have your box of tools, but then there's something about letting that go and just meeting the creative force within.
You've probably seen in the Red Book where Jung is, there's, first of all, you see a palace up ahead in the sky on a cloud, and he's watering the depths, and these flowers are growing up in response to him lending his water, and it's actually a very good image of the Aquarius, the water bearer, to the depths. And in each flower is a hooded Kabiri, you know, the personification of the creative force. And anybody else? Tim, do you have any comments on that? I wondered what you had to say.
Well, I mentioned this in Skip Scoop this week, that one thing that's really helpful for me in just trying to come to terms with what you're talking about in the male, that it's so hard for us to incorporate the relatedness, is this idea that intimacy requires that the person be willing to be penetrated.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really true. And as a man, what I'm trying to do is to open myself up enough to be willing to be penetrated by the world, so that I'm not just a kind of a stoic closed castle, but that I'm in relationship with the rest of the world. And that relationship, just like democracy, you have to fight for the right of the other person, not necessarily for your own. And so that image of willingness to be penetrated is, for me as a male, really helpful.
It's a passive receptivity, and you can symbolize it by the ego quieting itself and allowing it. It's more of it can also be called a permeability. I mean, I have no problem with the analogy, but for it is the equivalent of what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, the only thing as I'm saying is if the man is being penetrated, then it's kind of a little bit of a leap, but anyway, it's a passive receptivity. But I get it. Yeah. Go, Jordy or Adam or anybody.
I was going to make a comment similar to yours, that permeability can be a substitute expression, even though the implicit force of penetration and the implicit passivity have some meaning or some residual meaning here.
Yes.
And permeability, I will say permeability management.
Mm-hmm.
Not always is welcome, and not always is healthy.
I think, yes, I think a woman one time told you that, Tim, wasn't it? That that was
right. A therapist that works with
yes.
artists
Mm-hmm.
told me that.
Yes.
And I'll never forget that.
Yeah. Yeah. It was her comment as a woman about the act of something happening. What was it exactly, Tim? Do you remember?
Well, my recollection was she was talking to me about tango, and because we're both tango dancers. And she said, the male in the tango dance has to be willing to step forward into the woman's space.
Mhm.
And that is hard for me kind of as a soft male, but I have to learn how to do that. And she also said that intimacy is the
Yes,
feminine.
that was what it was. Yeah. The willingness
feminine-
to be penetrated is what
Yes,
intimacy
right.
is. And it's an image, but it's also anyway. Does anyone else have any comments? And then we'll close till next time. Adam or go ahead, Louis.
I want to ask you, you mentioned the protocols.
Yes.
It might be a year or two before they're published.
Yes.
You know why the delay? Because you and I each have a copy of the protocols, although we don't know the German. Why it's taking so long?
That's a good question. I mean, if you remember, I had set up a GoFundMe to translate them into English, and I got sued, or was threatened to get sued by the Jung family, and Robert Henshaw, who is the publisher of the protocols. Could I
ask if you don't mind sharing, why would they sue you for raising funds that was dedicated to assisting in publishing the protocols when you had no profit motive in it yourself?
Well, okay, I'll tell you in short, they claim that they had a copyright in Europe that was 75 years after the death of Jung, but somebody told me in North America it's only 50 years. So that copyright ran out in 2011, and their copyright goes to 2036 or something like that, and so they at least, so it was an empty threat, but go ahead.
If they're fighting on the grounds of copyright, how is it Damon Publishing that's planning to publish?
Yeah, they're publishing it. I think actually.
Why aren't they fighting them on the same grounds then?
Oh, they're not fighting it anymore. Actually, it is going to be published by the Philemon Foundation. It's actually in the works, and it'd be 2 or 3 years.
But isn't that where your money was in the end going?
I told him I would give it to him.
Oh,
I just told, it was Thomas Fisher, who's Jung's great grandson, who, by the way, looks exactly like him.
Yes,
when he was his age.
I've had contact with him.
Yes.
On the past.
He looks exactly like Jung when he was in college. But anyway. Yeah.
I'm surprised because it seemed to me that you're just Aesop, I think, is rumored to have said no good deed goes unpunished. And here that's true in your case, because from my view, you were just doing a perfectly good deed. You had no personal skin in the game.
I told him I would devote any sales. I didn't want any money for selling it. And if there were any, I would give it to him. But I did say, I'm not ever going to do anything against the Jung family. And I didn't mean any harm. And Thomas Fisher acknowledged that I didn't have any harm. But go ahead.
Matter of fact, it's the Jung estate themselves who should use modern technology and develop their own GoFundMe.
Yeah, I asked him, I said, this thing's going to be a bestseller if you do it. Why don't you do it? What are you waiting around for? What are you publishing all these other things when that's what everybody wants to read, because it's got all the juicy points about his relationship with Tony Wolff and everything else,
and Richard Wilhelm's relationship with the Chinese girl.
Yes, I mean it's very racy. It's everything. Yeah. It's all the cutting room floors from Memories, Dreams, and Reflections. But anyway, that's my little story, my little claim to fame.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yes. Well, does anyone else have any comments? And then we'll finish it up next time. And I'll at some point, if you want to, we could start next time on Joan Chodrow's book, which is all Jung on active imagination. And it's I think a real good jump start. I can splice in a little bit more from encounters with the soul. But we might want to just start out with Joan Chud Rose, because I just recently reread the book, and it is fabulous. I mean, every single, you're going to read Secret of the Golden Flower, Transcendent Function, one of the 2 essays, and everything. And it's just chock full of drop dead good information. But anyway, I'll send, I think I already sent that out, but I'll send out another copy. But okay, now anybody got any closing words of wisdom to carry us forward for a week? Anybody? Okay, well, everybody have a great weekend, and I'm so grateful. I'm learning so much from, like I said, this is my most productive week ever, and it wouldn't be without our group, I don't think. Okay, well, we'll see you next time. Okay, bye-bye.